Hello and welcome to our Cloud Native Security panel. I'm your host, Mike Vizard, and we have an august panel today to discuss the latest trends in this area, which is still emerging in my mind. But we have some housekeeping to take care of before we get started. The first is you're all eligible for 4 $25 gift card certificates, so make sure you stick around to the very end. I would also draw your attention to the Q&A panel button. We really encourage participation. We'll be monitoring those questions as we go through the whole session. And we have some fabulous experts and one-time chance to ask them some questions that you might not otherwise get to ask them till the next physical conference that we go to. And who knows when that's going to be, right, folks? All right. Our panelist today is Girish Bhatt, who's a vice president for Sumo Logic. And then we have Shiri Yevdatsan, who's a product manager for WhiteSource. Then we're joined by Scott Gerlach, who's the CSO for Stackhawk. And then we have Justin McCarthy, who's a CTO for StrongDM. And then there's John Sanda, lead engineer for DataStack. And finally, Marina Segal, who is director of product management for Sysdig. Everybody, welcome to our panel. Let's get started with Marina. I guess I'm curious. We've been talking about security now for decades. What makes cloud native security so different? And what is it that people should be thinking about as an approach here that is not the same as what they're used to? Because there is a tendency to just say, you know, I've got firewalls and I've got new workloads. So what? What's different?
It's a great question. And we're talking about it basically every day with our clients. The security is not different. We still need to secure our most sensitive assets. We need to protect our data, our compute, our workloads. What it makes it more complicated or challenging and different in a sense is that cloud is evolving and it adds many new different services, and it makes it very easy for developers or any other person who is using cloud services to spin out new services and start using all those great technologies. Now, with all this innovation and all the ability to scale and make changes to the infrastructure through the UI, through the APIs, it makes it very complex. It's a moving target, basically. And the way we need to look at it in terms of securing it and protecting it is that it's no longer a one single asset that we are protecting. It's a moving piece of different technologies and different pieces that we need to adjust, and being able to protect it is very complex from the expertise and technological perspective.
Oh, great. Anybody want to jump in on that?
And I'm sure there are people here who can add to that from their experience and knowledge.
Yeah, so I can definitely add to that. I think that, again, it's not just that the applications are now not monolithic and they are distributed. It's also that the services are distributed. So no longer do we have, one server that we need to protect, but we have cloud. Maybe we have 3 different cloud vendors that our organization work with. Maybe it's different infrastructures. So beside the challenge of security, there is also a challenge of visibility. Am I aware of all the different things that are going on? And this is exactly as Marina mentioned. This world is evolving, as well as the security tools and the visibility tools that are still evolving. And I think that for traditional security teams, this is definitely a very big challenge. They are sometimes not even aware and don't know all the different technologies that they need to track, and maybe they don't even have the right tools. So it's definitely a different world and a different challenge, and they need to get the right training, but also the right mindset, right? The fact that this world is still evolving. There may be not one and not 2 security tools that will cover this entire space.
Scott, let me ask you to follow up on that. how much do you think this is a people issue versus a process issue versus a tools issue? And these are always the mixes of things that always seem to come together, but sometimes we got to lean one way or the other. Where are we right now in terms of cloud native security? Are we just at the beginning, or do we need to change everything, or are there things that we do today that can be adapted to tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mindset problem to me. Like Marina and Shuri were just both talking about kind of how our development teams can go fast now, which is what we want them to do. We want them to deliver features and product to customers. We were artificially slowing that down with operations teams that had to provision bare metal servers and VM servers, and they didn't have control of what they could spin up. Now, I kind of personally think cloud service makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to know a bunch of stuff to be able to provision an EC2 instance or all those good things. And they come fairly secure by default. So you don't just get open ports to an EC2 instance unless you open them on purpose. Now, the mindset problem that I think that I'm talking about is those kind of old school security teams who are trying to be in control or be aware of all of the things that are trying to happen in their environment, instead of empowering their teams to help them collate that information and inform the security team so they can do their trust and verify job instead of their point-in-time control job.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to that before I call on you?
Yeah, let me jump in there, Mike. I have a slightly different perspective, which complements all the panelists' viewpoints, nevertheless. So from Sumo Logic's perspective, we were born in the cloud 11 years ago. So for us, security is integral and native. It's embedded with everything we do. So yes, everything we do is cloud native from day one, right? We go back 11 years since the founding of the company, meaning we have seen the journey of different security tools and technologies emerge, as well as new frameworks. I know Mike and team, we're going to discuss that in a little bit about serverless, microservices, and all the cool stuff, right? But we've been doing cloud native security for many years. But what I always encourage people to think about is, it's not only security is a foundation for the modern cloud. If you're not securing, if your foundation is not secure, then you're just, you may as well as pack up, right? So our CISO has a great phrase on that. I won't exactly, I'll paraphrase his quote. What he says is, we cannot take a risk of being breached, particularly for us as a cloud observability and security solution provider. Everything we do is cloud native and integral. And sure, we, like any other company, we embrace container technologies, serverless technologies, and securing them all the way from compliance, audit, as well as orchestration perspective. So it's an exciting time to be a cloud native security practitioner as well as a solution provider. I think we are just getting started here, folks.
All right, Justin, let me ask you something. A lot of folks will say that, we need to deploy applications as quickly as possible. It's part of the whole DevOps ethos. There are other folks, some of them on the security side, who are saying, we're having a Ralph Nader moment here and software is unsafe at any speed and we need to slow down. What's your sense of, is there a balance to be struck between those two things? Are we leaning too far one way on the left side and not enough on the right? How do we kind of get to something that everybody's comfortable with?
Sure. Okay. So I'll say this. Let's say in a previous generation where there was more physical manifestation of deployment, right, and where there was more layering, where you could point to a perimeter, you could point to a firewall. Everybody had this shared model and metaphor that they could see, right, and to some extent, even if it was in a co-location facility, you still had this metaphor. So what I'll say is that what that also did is that through the specialization of the skills, the person who worked on the network was different from the person who wrote the code. It created this forcing function. It created this necessary conversation, right? And so there was a certain amount of time we necessarily spent sort of digesting the should we and the versus the could we. And there is less of that now. Right. So there is a question of how do you, I don't know if we're shifting things left or right or up or down, but how do you blend in minute to minute, more of the awareness. And I'll also say this: I appreciate the feeling of speed and productivity, and I think everybody does, right? You want to feel productive with your work, and one thing that can feel pretty unproductive is interminable analysis paralysis. And if you get down to like the mathematical definition of information security, and you gaze into the abyss of like things I remember and know themselves being part of what's in scope and what's on my screen being in scope, you can just get lost forever. So at some point you need a way to halt the debate and say, we've made some decisions, we've made a design, we have some shared metaphors, let's move forward. And ideally, that's a lot of point of views participating in that.
All right, John, how do we go about doing that? Do I just throw everybody in a room and lock the door and hope something good happens? Or is there some thoughtful process here to strike some balance?
That's a great question. And I think in my experience where I'm involved in working primarily in open source, there's trying to find that balance, and the paralysis kind of rung a bell. Where it's for us, for the project we work on, it's a evolving process in terms of understanding where we're trying to go with the security in general. And so I think it's trying to figure out, do things incrementally, because we could spend weeks, months trying to implement security best practices, and when we get through an iteration for implementing things we're trying to do, then we're going to turn around and see, there's something else that we need to address. And so it's trying to find, like I said, a balance that's going to still allow us to move forward. And so that's been the approach that we've taken thus far with the Kate Santa project. For example, we've gone through right now and realizing, we put all of our images in public repositories and realize that a lot of users they're not going to have network access for pulling images. And so basically going through and doing an audit of all the images that we're deploying and make sure that, that users have the ability to pull those from a separate repository. And it's a tedious task. It takes time to do things like that, but it's necessary. And so then we say, okay, but then we're going to take a look at the next sprint and see what are things that we can do to improve further.
All right, Sherry, I'd love to get your thoughts on the following. Based on what those two guys just said, there's clearly been a lot of attacks on software supply chains. And frankly, I'm not even sure if we're just noticing them more or if they've always been happening all along the way anyway. And now we're just talking about them more because bigger companies are involved. But in either case, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, something to the effect of never let a good crisis go to waste. So if we're having this software supply chain crisis, we may be struggling up now, but will things ultimately get better? And what's your take on where are we right now?
Yeah, so software supply chain is definitely a trend, right? The software supply chain insecurity. And it's definitely something, software supply chain is a broad term. It refers to anything that is not your software, anything that is not the code you wrote, that is either, a third party that you bring in, maybe something within the actual software supply chain, like CI/CD security, infrastructure as code security, but also refers in general API security is some part of software supply chain. So definitely a very, very broad term. Again, as far as we see it, if we go to the open source world, there is definitely an ongoing trend of trying to attack open source components, trying to bring in malicious packages. We've seen it many times in the last year, and this is something that we don't think will go away in the near future. So protecting against malicious packages, whether they are, third party or whether they are open source malicious packages, those are things that we will need to take care of. So it's it's a funny thing because, again, open source, you didn't write it, third-party code, you didn't write it, but you still own managing the risk. And this is the thing with supply chain. You own managing the security. So it's definitely not going to go away as far as I see it. And this is something that we will need to address as security teams, as DevSecOps, definitely as companies who are dealing with security. This is something that we will need to address in the coming year, definitely.
All right. Marina, let me ask you, do we take the cloud native security stuff seriously enough? And I ask the question because a lot of folks think that somehow or other containers are magically secure in their own right. They somehow or other think that maybe the worst thing that can happen is there's crypto jacking, which some people refer to as a nuisance crime. They're kind of like, it's the cloud service provider's problem at the end of the day, and they just kind of nod at it and move on. So are we in danger of kind of, as we think about software supply chains, ignoring the container side of that equation because we think that they are secure somehow?
I think we can't assume that any part of our infrastructure is secure by default. We need to ensure that we understand the entire stack. With containers, it's a bit more complicated because of the different reasons. First of all, because a container needs to run on some underlying infrastructure. We need to understand the security of the cloud or the host where the container is running. And that's the entire different team usually takes care of it. And it's an entire different framework or security principles that address that part. So we kind of assume that, it's running on the EC2 instance and we have some tools to protect our cloud environment. It should be fine. But it's not exactly secure because it's running on the secure host environment. The problem with containers is that they are complicated. They don't live for a long time. They go up and down all the time. They're ephemeral. And we don't have good enough enrichment to understand at every single moment what happened inside of the container. So it provides the attackers a very good place to hide and a very good way to get unnoticed in our environment. The breaches that happen that are more popular, obviously in container space, are around cryptojacking, but it's not everything that happens in the containers. A lot of it is causing lateral movement, and then the breach is actually happening in different part of the infrastructure. It's not related to container itself, but it was caused by the container lateral movement that started there. So a lot of it is because containers are running on our infrastructure in different places. People are not very knowledgeable about how the containers are structured. It's very complicated technology, and security tool sets not always providing the entire enrichment for us to understand what happened. So there is a lot of space for us as the security professionals to provide that simplicity to the users to understand containers and how to secure them in a more user-friendly way, and also give more observability tools and places where we can see what actually happened at every given moment.
All right. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so it's so I absolutely agree with the views shared. So for us, since we are a solution provider and a cloud service provider for observability and security, we not only have to subscribe to the best practices and leverage some of the third-party tools that exist out there, but it's part of the overall solution. That is, whether it is containers, authentication, orchestration, monitoring, vulnerability assessment, we have a more holistic view of how we take that. Absolutely, containers are a critical part of a modern cloud platform like ours. However, we also need to orchestrate across the different, not only container orchestration mechanism, but across the entire IT and security stack as well. So for us, we look at things more holistically, and the cloud native world, the foundations are, you need to do the fundamentals right, and it gets a lot more complex because, to the point, a lot of instances are ephemeral. You may have few minutes to actually determine whether it's a go or no go, or to block something. If you don't have the right monitoring and visibility and orchestration to take the remediation action, it's too late. By then the damage is already done, right? To your example of crypto jacking, yeah, it may seem harmless, but then at some point in time, there is an ROI investment that you may negatively get impacted as well.
All right.
Back to you, Mike.
Scott, I'd love to ask you this question since you're our resident CSO. Are we incapable of learning in IT? Because I feel like we have seen this movie before, right? Every time a new platform comes along, we roll it out and then we go, oh, I guess we should think about securing this thing. And it seems like the same thing is happening with Kubernetes and containers and serverless frameworks over again. So do you have any insights as to why we keep doing it this way? And is there a better way to think about this stuff in the future? Or is this like some perpetual cycle we're always going to be on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in some fashions it's perpetual, right? Technology is always going to be advancing. The thing that we struggle with as security professionals most often is being comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, things are happening very, very quickly. New stuff comes out. We tend to go, but that's not how we did stuff before. So I don't know how this fits into my model of things that we should do, as opposed to kind of going, cool, I want to learn this with you, and being a good improv partner with the business or the engineering team or whoever is rolling out new stuff, and going, yes, and I would love to learn that too, so I can understand how to help you make solid decisions. So it's funny that you say we're incapable of learning. It's hard for us to learn because our job is hard as security professionals. Like, we're a small team, usually in a big team, kind of given the charge of, let's make sure this is safe. And PS, don't turn the business off, because that's the only way to not get breached. So how do we kind of keep up with this acceleration of business and this momentum that the company is actually putting on us while staying sane? And I think part of that is like spreading out who has decision-making capabilities. And, Girish is talking about observability, but security observability is a thing that you can spread out into the organization if you give them great tools. If you use this tool, it will funnel information back to me. I can help you make solid decisions. But if we do it in kind of that closed off, only the security team knows about it, this is my toy and I'm going to keep it. If we kind of do it that way, people just go around us, and then we really don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. John, is this just a matter of risk? I mean, I'm asking this question because, to me, you look like somebody who's comfortable being uncomfortable. So, do I have to get to the point where I just accept this level of risk and I have to figure out what is my tolerance for that? And is it more about observing those workloads to determine which ones actually need to be super secure and which ones I can kind of let go here and there? I mean, what is that? Do I need to button everything down into this ultimate zero trust exercise, or can I get to something reasonable from the perspective of the developer, maybe?
I think it is a question of trade-offs and an acceptable level of risk. And I think, all the things I'm hearing that resonate with having the tooling and understanding, that's going to vary from in one organization to the next, and in the case of who's consuming, the software I'm delivering. So, and I think one of the areas that it's a constantly learning for myself, constantly learning and trying to improve things in ways that are going to, improve the security. And one of the things that I thought of, we need to provide not just this. We're not just going to distribute excuse me, one moment, please.
No, there we go.
Sorry, I have some little ones that are homesick. So what I was saying was having the tooling and the automation is essential. As you know, we have seeing where we are on the spectrum for what's acceptable and not acceptable. We're looking at right now the work we're doing, looking at solutions for certificate management, for secret management, and putting solutions in place. Like, well, we know we need to have some solutions, but also we need to manage the expiration of those certificates and the secrets. And so one solution, the initial solution we're looking at, that might be acceptable for some of our users, but it may not be that may not be acceptable for others. And so we're not, where we are today may be acceptable for some users. Where we are tomorrow is, going to be have a different solution in place.
All right. Well, let's follow up with that, Marina. What is the level of acceptance? And I'm going to ask the question because, I've talked to a couple of developers and they scratch their head and the story goes something like this. They're like, let me get this straight. I got to take all these open source components. I got to check those out for vulnerabilities. Then I encapsulate them. And then as I'm moving through the encapsulation, I need to check out the host system to make sure that it's secure as well. Then once I put the thing out into production, I got to check that. And then once it's out in production, I got to keep track of it because there's vulnerabilities that may be introduced into the components that I encapsulated. And this is like this endless loop. And they look at me and they go, so this is progress? Is this better? I mean, how do we kind of make that acceptable? Marina, you may be on mute. All right, well, let's try that. You there?
I could go, Mike.
All right, go for it, Justin. We'll come back to Marina.
All right. So the making it acceptable is it's fundamentally in your own personal and organizational psychology, because there's no technical fix. And I just the easy way to know that there's never a technical answer alone is just go to the limit case, right? Like just imagine, like theoretically, every byte that's in every block of memory in every computer everywhere, right? Like there's theoretically some way to determine whether Mike should or shouldn't have access to that. And ideally you'd want that in hardware. And then you'd want the cable that's connected to that hardware to also know who Mike is as he's looking at that byte, right? And then you'd want the screen that's connected to Mike to also figure out whether his eyes are the ones looking at the pixels, right? And then maybe even the memory engrams that you've stored to be revocable from your brain. So like that, you can write this very idealized version of how you want everything to work, and then immediately convince yourself that that's not in this decade or in our lifetimes, likely. So then yeah, you have to still make progress. Okay, so the serverless containerization, it gives us some ability to develop quickly in some way that we do embrace, and we just have to figure out what incremental progress toward that ultimate vision can we make in this increment with essentially with the hardware that's available and with the libraries that are available. So that's it. So accept it first, tolerate that.
Shiri, you want to add to that? Because Justin basically just told me to suck it up, Buttercup, and I got that.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
if I can maybe add to that. So my take on that again is that, and following what Scott just mentioned, and you spoke about how security teams or IT teams need to help the organization and learn new things. So I think it's all about having those very small processes, like identifying what is the current process, right? Let's say, software delivery pipeline, and organizations are using CI/CD, if you can just add a small security step to the already existing process, like let's say you already have testing ongoing as part of your registry maybe, or you have functional tests in your CI/CD cycle. So adding small, very actionable things with regards to security, like small tests. If you already have a code review process that is going on, maybe as part of the pull request in GitHub, add the small security stuff and small security scanning to that, so that it will be automatic. Developers don't have to do anything about it. And also developers, they don't want to be security experts. They don't need to be security experts, right? So we need to give them very small actionable things to do. If there is an error, we want them to know what to do. If we can fix it automatically, let's go ahead and do it for them. I mean, they don't have to work hard. I think that the entire, just as you mentioned, like this friction that is going on, and no, I don't want to scan. Why do I need to scan? Why do I need to do that? It's all because they don't need to be the experts around security. So it's very important.
Scott, you were putting your thumb up there on those comments, so let me jump in here with you for a second. But a lot of developers resent this whole shift left conversation because they are being told that somehow or other they're responsible for everything and that they're supposed to know everything about security. And I have to wonder, is it even reasonable to ask developers to know that level of security?
Yeah, so here's the thing. They hate this because we don't let them make decisions on stuff, and then we try to teach them how to do our job. So we're like, hey guys, you're not great developers, but I can teach you how to be an AppSec person by sending you to school and doing a bunch of other stuff. It's just not their job. So we're not giving them great tooling that informs them how to make decisions and letting them make decisions. Man, we have a hard time with that one. Like, ooh, if they can decide that something's a false positive and they're wrong, that's terrible. Unless, of course, it's documented and you can go look at it, then it's great. Because now there's a decision as people can go review. So it's not that they don't want to do it. It's that we make it really hard for them to know about it. The analogy I use here is when, in a lot of presentations, is when the exec team comes to the FP&A team and goes, hey, we want to model out a price increase. And then the accounting team goes, cool, I have to teach you about the P&L first. And they're like, what? No, I just want to put in top line numbers and see what it does. And so our job is to give them better tooling, better information, let them make decisions so we can collaborate with them. And then they're more accepting of this additional ownership. If they can decide, make decisions, and then they're okay with owning. Same thing with test-driven development. Like if they can write the tests and they know how to solve the tests, they're cool with the tests.
All right, that was like no security taxation without representation. Is that what that was?
Sure.
Mike, can I jump in there? So this is a real anecdotal fact that happened in a company I used to work before. So we all talk about shift left and all. That's great, right? AppSec, embedding, making people more security aware. That's cool. Absolutely, we need to do that. So in one of the companies, a CTO who joined, he said every developer should also support ops, meaning they're not only checking the code, but they're actually on call, right? Supporting their infrastructure and the cloud thing. That is the best thing that happened to the company. So my point there is, we tend to a little bit overemphasize on shift left. What we are seeing is, hey, you need a balance between that and what I think it's emerging as shift right. Having the developers and people being actionable on the operation side of things. It's like you have a developer writing code, right? And they need to own that, not just to check in and it work, but also how is it happening as part of the operation cycle, right? The monitoring and troubleshooting cycle, as opposed to passing it off to someone else. Initially there was resistance from the quote unquote developer saying, hey, that's someone else's job to do the operations part. But overall, the quality of the solution was much better when you had developers supporting the operation side. So I'm a big fan of having a balance between shift left and shift right, particularly when it comes to security as well.
I couldn't agree more to what Gracious said. What we are seeing these days is that we took everything, we tried to shift it left. Now our goal with the IIC coming out, we actually have the tools to connect it back to production, and we know which workload was spun out from which piece of code for the infrastructure. And now we have the tool set that will allow us to connect it back and make sure that the entire pipeline, all the steps are connected. And not only we are taking something and putting it somewhere in the pipeline, we're actually connecting it instead of dividing the pipeline. And I think that's the magic of what we've created. And with all this technology, now that we know how to write the infrastructure with code and deploy it through the GitOps practices, we have the ability to connect all the pieces together. And that will allow developers to have much better control over what they're deploying, how it's running in production, and now how to fix it in the pre-prod.
All right. Well, Girish, you brought this up, so let's just sort it out right now. What is this observability thing that you speak of? Because everybody's kind of like, I've got monitoring tools. I've been looking at all this stuff for years. We all got tossed into a war room from time to time, and we're not allowed out of the war room till we prove our innocence. And of course, the security guy is in there, and fingers are getting pointed. So, observability is an improvement on this. How?
Right. Yeah. No. I think it's so that's the wonderful world we live in, right? We tend to get ahead of ourselves sometimes. But if you take a step back and look at what is observability trying to do, at the broad sense, it's about improving the business outcomes or the reliability of what we are supposed to deliver. That's how we look at it, Mike and team here and the audience as well, meaning it's not a particular technology per se. So if I'm a cloud service provider, let's say I'm Clorox, right? The company that was challenged and executed very well during the pandemic, right? Delivering wipes or whatever it was they were, plus other stuff they were doing. They have a clear business outcome, which means they have to provide the services in a timely fashion. That's the availability of their products and services. Plus, they need to do that in a timely fashion and in a secure way. So when I look at observability, it's a combination of how do I provide the business outcome in the sense of delivering the right performance, and it's available wherever I want across. So having said that, I know that sounded a little bit vague. I look at secure observability as a continuum of what we traditionally used to call monitoring and troubleshooting and things like that. This is where things are coming together. I think one of the challenges I kind of alluded to, we have more than 50 plus security tools today at Sumo Logic, right? And we are bringing it together with one internal platform. I mean, this has to solve. This is just security tools. There are probably another 50 plus IT-related tools, right? Plus finance tools. So the number keeps on adding up. So what we are doing is to bring it all, a unified approach to deliver the right business outcomes, which is what we are calling as observability. And security is foundational to that. End of the day, it's about, hey, am I providing my right business outcome? Is it available wherever I want? Am I delivering it in the right performance, is it right SLA performance? And then foundationally, is it secure? That's where we all come in and contribute, right? Irrespective of what the IT ops and the cloud infrastructure providers do.
All right. Justin, I'm going to ask you to respond to that a little bit, because you're on the receiving end of a lot of these alerts from the security folks, I imagine. And, do those alerts, are they meaningful? Do they have context? Or as part of the issue here is, Scott and his team are just throwing stuff over the wall and asking you to catch it. And you're like, what do I do with it?
Well, actually, it's possible. I may have to disappoint you, Mike, because actually I feel like we are the source of a lot more enriched information that generates alerts. So, but I can speak to alerts. So because at StrongDM our product is all about access control to the infrastructure. What we're typically doing is we're typically generating events that say John connected to this Kubernetes cluster at this moment. And so creating an enriched record that then can become signal for any kind of event correlation system, I think that's where we see actually a lot of work to be done, and that's a lot of the work that we have done at our organization. So basically turning a bit of text into something that has more structure, that has more identity, and that can then be correlated across, like as Girish said, the 50 other applications that are also involved in the sort of total story of observability and security. It's a big problem, and it's an area that actually there are far fewer standards than I think than we would hope there would be at this point. So how do you standardize, for example, an event across all of those? That's definitely some undiscovered country at this point.
All right, we have a question from one of the attendees, and I want to get to that in the context of the next question, which is going to go to Marina. We have this notion, all right, so cloud native is a buzzword, people throw it around, but for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to say it spans containers and Kubernetes and serverless computing frameworks and all this next generation technology, and maybe not so much virtual machines and legacy platforms. They don't go away. They're still there. So that brings us to the question. So today, I've still got all my legacy stuff, right, Marina? None of that stuff's really going to disappear over tomorrow. Now I'm adding in all this cloud native stuff. So now I've got serverless frameworks and Kubernetes and the container platforms, and they're all generating signal. So, how do I deal with all that signal, and how do I synthesize that into something that results in actionable intelligence? What are you guys thinking about here?
It's a very complicated topic that I think all of us would want to solve. I believe that it relates to enrichment. It relates to simplifying all of those signals that we are getting across all the tools, all the infrastructure pieces of our environment into a human readable language of who did what and where, and correlating it with an asset. Because in the end of the day, what we are protecting is our data or data of our clients and our compute assets, so no one can use them for bad things. And making all this noise being correlated to those who did what and where, making it simple is a very complicated task, because every piece of our environment is acting and defined in a different manner. I think a lot of the problems are caused because of the misconfigurations, irrespective where it is. Either if it is in the cloud or in the on-prem world. I think the foundational piece of making sure that there are no human errors and that the things are being configured properly, irrespective of what it is, cloud, service, container, or VM, is on us, because that's the simplest thing we can do to make sure that we deploy the right infrastructure. And then on top of it, we should build additional practices of threat intelligence and understanding what's going on in my system in the runtime. And that should be always looked at as something that is on top of the assets that we are running in our environment.
Mm-hmm. All right. Scott, I feel like there's a backlash coming, and it has to do with that misconfiguration comment that Marina just made. There are misconfigurations everywhere. The ports are left open. The Kubernetes is misconfigured. The Docker APIs are misconfigured. Feels like, honestly, a bit of a giant mess. So do you think, a lot of organizations are sitting there saying, well, we got to do something about software supply chain? And maybe the answer can't be DevSecOps because we don't have time for that. So we need a better way to kind of secure things overnight. And that's, when I talk to folks, the security team now has a mandate to go fix this stuff, regardless of what developers are saying about workflow and whatever else. So is there a bit of tension in the air?
I mean, there is tension in the air, and the tension comes from just resource overload, right? The worst thing you can do is go, cool, I can't partner with the engineering team anymore because they're doing stuff poorly, or they don't have good foundation set up, so I just got to do it all by myself. you just flat can't hire enough security people to keep up with an engineering org when you're staffed at like a 1-to-6, 1-to-20, 1-to-50 ratio. So the best thing you can do is help set up good templates. So there's probably a DevOps team that's working on Terraform templates for stuff. Get in there and help them figure out sane defaults, because developers aren't in there inventing magic, right? They're trying to get stuff done. If you provide them things to be able to get stuff done quickly, and it also has sane defaults in it, they're going to use it. They're not going to go, oh, this seems silly, I'm not using that. But you have to get in there and help give them that good tooling, those good sane defaults. And fixing the old stuff that's out there, that's a whole nother challenge. But if you can get yourself in a spot where you can move forward with good templates, good sane defaults, good things people can just consume and use, you can stop the bleeding and then you'll have time to go look at the other things. So I think it's still about, security teams have a tough time doing this, going to partner with those engineering teams, spending time understanding what they're working on, what are their pain points, how can you as a security professional help them do their thing better so that they also want to partner with you is super important to be able to undo this kind of backlash that may be bubbling up a little bit.
Sherry, how do I have that conversation? Because I think what he just said was, we want to come in and have a conversation about blowing up your DevOps tool chain and reworking this thing. So how does that conversation go, and how do you kind of get people on board?
So I think that's the challenge. Honestly, I think this is the challenge. The challenge is making sure that, again, developers get some sort of value, right? They need to understand what is the value that we as security teams, as AppSec teams, give them. They want to get things done. That's developers, right? They want to get things done and move to the next cool feature that they have to develop. This is what they are being measured on. They're not being measured on whether or not there is a security issue in the environment or in the feature they just released. And this is what we need to change, right? We need to make sure that if there is a security issue, we're trying to make sure that the developers are aware of it, that they are aware that there was a security issue, there was a security breach, sort of what caused that. Make sure that they have the responsibility, right? It's everyone's responsibility, not just the security team. So the first thing is providing them value. The second thing is showing them that we actually prioritize the things that we want them to do, right? We don't just bombard you with all those different hundreds of alerts that I have. I'm prioritizing it for you. I'm trying to make sure that you as developer only deal with what actually matters for the business. So maybe it's about filtering out those internal things that are less interesting now. Maybe it's about filtering out things that have a mitigation with other security tools that I have. But we need to make sure that they know that what they're doing for security is actually important. This is definitely our biggest challenge.
All right. Well, go ahead. So.
A lot of this resonates with me with the configuration and security. Some of it being orthogonal. With unfortunately with Apache Cassandra, authentication authorization is disabled by default, and I think far too many people will maybe even go to production with authentication authorization disabled, maybe for any number of reasons. They don't think they need it, think it's too complicated, and only after they get to production or get too far along realize this is a bad idea, and then they have a lot more work to do to go ahead and retrofit. So we really take a lot of painstaking effort in the project to work on to provide sane defaults, and security is a really good example where we say, well, we're going to go ahead and enable that by default because we know it's a good practice, and turn on and tune things so that it's going to work well for you out of the box, but without trying to make it more complicated for the user than it has to be. Because I think there was a comment earlier mentioned about that, where we don't want having people to be, we don't want everyone to have to be a security expert. And so similarly, I don't want everyone necessarily to have to be knowledgeable about how to run Cassandra securely and know the internals of the authorization and authentication model. But I don't want them to have a false sense of security either. And so trying to strike that balance and do so in a way, manifesting that through configuration, make it easy for the users. And so that's an area where we're constantly looking at and trying to area of focus for us. It's an ongoing journey.
All right, I am shocked and appalled to discover that providers of software have turned up the security defaults to make it look easier to install. That's just unheard of. I think Kubernetes does the same thing. Everybody's doing the same thing, and I wish they would stop. Sherry, quick question for you. Scanning. I mean, in theory, developers are supposed to do this, but in my experience, it doesn't happen. And what happens is they write code and then they tell themselves, well, it's only a little bit of code and we'll scan it later. And then by the end of the week or 2 weeks later, they got a massive amount of code to scan. And then they're like, well, I don't want to do that. That's going to take hours. So is there some way to kind of put a guardrail around scanning that says that thou shalt scan regardless of whether you want to or not?
Yeah, so I think that there are definitely ways to do it. I mean, integrating things within the pipeline to scan automatically is something that we can definitely do, right? So it's all about the governance that the security teams make. Whether or not, of course, we don't want to build any bottlenecks for the developers. So we don't want to slow down development. We don't want to say, if you didn't scan a component, we will automatically fail the build or something like that. Of course, we can do that, but that's not very recommended. It's all about building this relationship, and failing the build is probably not the best way to build a relationship with the developers. So I think it's definitely about making sure that we try and give them the tools to shift left as much as we can. So if we can prevent things, right? If it's about open source components, maybe we can give them the tool to choose better open source components. If they are now researching a new functionality and they want to add a new open source component, maybe we can highlight the risk before they even wrote one line of code. And then it's not that expensive in terms of their time and their efforts to just switch to a new component. So I think it's all about finding those ways to make sure that we go with them and not against them. Of course, if there is a critical security vulnerability, there is no choice but to fail the build or block things from being deployed to production. But that's not the best case. The best case is making sure that we prevent things before things are being, even before the code is being written. That's actually the best possible way to do it.
All right. Sherry, that was great advice. So I'm going to jump to asking our other panelists for their final comments and best advice. Everybody's got maybe a minute or so. So let's just start with Marina. What do you think? What best advice?
I think there are a lot of advices, and we covered so many great insights here. Making the life of developers and security professionals simpler is our goal now. We made it so complicated by introducing so many tools and so many alerts and so many technologies. Now we need to make, we have all the tools, we have all the data. Now we need to prioritize, make it actionable, readable to humans, and make the life of people who take care of security as easy as it can get. So basically give them a way to spend 15 minutes on security and get the most out of those 15 minutes of their lives every day to make gradual progress on securing their environments.
Great. Justin, what do you think?
My top tip is to try to make it fun. And I know that may sound difficult, but I think it's a great goal to aspire to. I know I always enjoy capture the flags. I always enjoy sort of doing and finding a way to spread that out through the team in a continuous way. It just keeps the conversation open continuously rather than open and closed. So we do have elements of our build pipeline that actually do some scanning that I think everyone on the team appreciates and that we've authored and that we think is fun to enhance, right? And so there are other internal internal events that we also do that just make it fun. So try to find a way to make it fun.
All right, John, what are you thinking?
I think I'm going to steal something Justin said earlier about analysis paralysis. I think it's easy, at least for me, when it comes to security, to fall victim to analysis paralysis. And I think, don't fall prey to that. You need to look at things as like anything else. It's an iterative process, and try to approach things incrementally, and don't get overwhelmed. And look at how you can make incremental improvements, just like with anything else in your software. You're not going to necessarily arrive at the perfect solution overnight. And I think it's happened to me plenty of times where you get overwhelmed. And I think understanding and anything we can do to make things easier. If it's easy to turn on MTLS to do certificate rotation and do different things, people are going to do it. So in terms of if you're building the components, building out the infrastructure, if you can make things easier, I think people are happy to do them if we can make things easier.
All right, we got fun, easy, less complex. Girish, what are your thoughts? You got a minute.
Okay, I think both Justin and John covered what I was going to say. I'll keep this up slightly differently. So it's like two parts to it. It's continuous learning, folks. Because I look at the security awareness training corporates. I just finished my annual one. It was great. I won't identify the tool that we use internally. But when I think about my developers who go through that, it doesn't necessarily, it's good from a corporate perspective, but not necessarily equip them to write the secure code or make sure they monitor and troubleshoot it appropriately. Invest in continuous learning, particularly around security. I don't care whether it's SANS, ISC Square, AWS, Google, Azure. Get some basic training and certification. That's one, the continuous learning. And then the next part, I think John talked about, it's about simplicity. Let's not continue this tools proliferation, right? So like, for example, there are observability solutions today which will tell you, hey, your Kubernetes it has vulnerabilities. And there are workbooks or playbooks you can execute today to not only monitor, to understand your security posture, your compliance, and visibility, and remediate that in real time. This silos between so-called DevOps and SecOps has to go away. There are tools who do that today. I would encourage people to invest in that. It's particularly simple tools. Again, continuous learning, continuous simplicity is what I would say.
All right, those are life lessons. So thank you. Scott, take us home.
Yeah, you bet. The one thing that I always tell security engineers, AppSec engineers that work for me or that work other places and look for advice is go sit with an engineering team. Like, just go sit with them in their daily stand-ups, in their Scrum, in their lots of stuff. Don't say anything. Just hang out. Like, figure out what they're doing, what technologies they're trying to use, what problems they're trying to solve, so that you can then understand those things and help them go faster. If you start helping those teams go faster, they'll be more willing to work with you, be able to figure out safer, saner ways to do stuff like Cassandra with authorization, those kinds of things. But it's all about actually forming a team instead of those silos inside of a company, and making sure you build good partnerships along the engineering team. If you do that, you can solve almost any problem.
All right. I want to thank our presenters today for sharing their knowledge and their insight. That was awesome. The winners of our gift cards are Johnny W., Chris P., Douglas F., and Megan S. Congratulations to everybody. We are right up on the 1 minute mark, as they say. So thank you all for spending some time with us, and have a great rest of your day, week, and career for that matter. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.